Well, good morning and welcome everyone to the 79th Presidential Advisory Council on HIV/AIDS, also known as PACHA, full council meeting. My name is Marlene McNeese. My pronouns are she and her, and I am one of the co-chairs of PACHA, and I currently serve as Deputy Assistant Director with the Houston Health Department, overseeing our HIV, STI, and viral hepatitis prevention programs. As a reminder to everyone who is joining us today, I want to briefly define PACHA, its charter, our mission, and what we do. PACHA provides advice, information, and recommendations to the Secretary of Health and Human Services regarding programs, policies, and research to promote effective treatment, prevention, and cure of HIV and its related syndemics. This advice and information and recommendations to the Secretary is truly regarding the development and implementation of our big initiatives in the U.S., ending the HIV epidemic initiative and the National HIV/AIDS strategy. On this brief slide, you'll see a short summary describing some of what we do not do and, of course, what we are here to do today. So we don't advise or give recommendations to any other agencies at the federal government outside of HHS, so not directly to HUD or DOJ as an example. We are not a funder. We are not the work of one person. This advisory committees do come together collectively with our expertise to provide recommendations, although they're not a mandate. So when we do these recommendations, they can be in a number of different formats through letters, documents, resolutions. And what I hope will be impactful today is I believe our work has been quite influential and impactful. So later on the agenda, we'll invite members to reflect on a few of these accomplishments later today, especially on the work that we've done in 2023. Given this being our final full council meeting of the year, I am excited because today is the occasion in which I am joined by my esteemed colleague and my new co-chair, Dr. Vincent Guillermo Ramos. Vincent, your dedication to ending the HIV epidemic has been nothing short of extraordinary. And during your tenure on PACHA is not new to you, but I'm certainly excited about your new role. As we embark on this chapter together, I am eager to participate and partner with you. So I just wanted to spend a few moments to invite you to share a few words with PACHA, including your vision to end the HIV epidemic.
Thank you so much, Marlene. I just want to start by saying good morning to everyone. It's truly an honor to co-chair PACHA. Marlene, it's an honor to be here seated beside you virtually. You have been a fearless leader and inspiration, not just to me, but to all of us at PACHA. I believe that truly to make a lasting impact, we have to foster a culture of creativity and openness. And I encourage PACHA and our collective imagination to be the catalyst for groundbreaking strategies that will pave the way towards achieving our goals. It is really in these unconventional ideas and not the business as usual that we discover the keys to unlocking new avenues for prevention, for treatment, and for care. The visionary approach that you, Marlene, alongside former co-chair Dr. John Weissman, have championed is truly inspiring, and I'm humbled to carry forward and expand upon this incredible legacy. And so just want to say thank you to you, to our federal partners and leaders, and also to each member of PACHA. Thank you.
Thank you again, Vincent. And also, since we last met, there has been a tremendous amount of activity. I am glad to be back from medical leave, sitting here back in the saddle here in Texas. I'm excited today to see everyone's lovely faces, and equally excited, as I said, about our agenda that we have pulled together for today. PACHA has also, since we last met, welcomed 13 new members, and we will add one additional member momentarily. So it's great to see that we are coming together. I also encourage our new composition of PACHA. I have been so excited over the past several years under new administration and new leadership to really forge ahead with a dynamic group of national leaders. So I hope that we continue to be daring and bold and relentless in our pursuits. And I think that together we can reshape the trajectory of the HIV epidemic. I think the time for transformative thinking is now, and our collective brilliance can illuminate the path toward a brighter, healthier future for everyone. So I will apologize in advance to members today for the agenda. We have short breaks, but we hope to make this agenda happen in a way that can be inclusive of robust conversation and discussion. And so we do hope that everyone who wants to share has an opportunity to do so. Before I welcome our first speaker, I want to ask participants to make sure that you turn off your camera during the panel presentations, and then of course turn it back on for our general discussion. Also, I want to remind folks both at the virtual table here and viewing live on HHS live stream that we will have a PACHA to the People community engagement session later today at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time. This session requires a separate registration. You still have time to go on and do that. It can be found for members in your calendar invite for PACHA, and for our federal partners, again, in that same meeting invitation, you can find the registration link and on the HIV.gov website if you are watching through the live stream. Now it's my privilege to welcome our next speaker, Ms. Sarah Newman Boating. She's the Principal Deputy Assistant Director, Secretary, for Health for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. She works directly with Admiral Rachel Levine, the Assistant Secretary for Health, and prior to joining the team at HHS, Ms. Boating served as Executive Deputy Secretary, at the Pennsylvania Department of Health. And she was the Special Assistant to the Physician General at the Pennsylvania Department of Health and the Director of Public Affairs at Planned Parenthood Keystone, and a consultant advocate, LGBTQ+ affair advisor for U.S. Senator Robert P. Casey Jr. I will welcome to our platform next Ms. Sarah Boating.
Thank you so much, PACHA Co-Chair McNeese, for your kind introduction, and greetings to the PACHA members, federal partners, and esteemed HIV community stakeholders listening through the HHS live stream. On behalf of Admiral Rachel Levine, the Assistant Secretary for Health, it's my honor to welcome you to the 79th full council meeting of the Presidential Advisory Council on HIV/AIDS, or as we call it, PACHA. As Ms. McNeese mentioned, I serve as the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Health, and I have the privilege of working alongside Admiral Levine in the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Health, where our vision is healthy people, healthy communities, and a healthy nation for all. Our vital work includes ending the HIV epidemic in the United States and around the globe. PACHA's advice and counsel to the Department of Health and Human Services is critical in our efforts, and we are grateful for your time, expertise, and dedication. I would also like to thank a true champion of public health, Ms. Kay Hayes, for her stellar leadership as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Infectious Disease and Director of the Office of Infectious Disease and HIV Policy, and Executive Director of PACHA. I have the privilege in my role to get to work closely with Kay, and she works across many important infectious disease portfolios, but I know firsthand that her efforts are always guided by her many years of experience dedicated to HIV issues and the needs of the communities enduring these harsh challenges. And I also want to extend my thank you to every PACHA member, federal partner, stakeholder, and community member for joining today's meeting and for the work you do every day. We could not continue towards collaborative progress without your unwavering dedication to ending the HIV epidemic. And as you had a chance to meet, I'm absolutely delighted to share that Dr. Vincent Guillermo Ramos has been invited by Secretary Becerra to join and serve as PACHA co-chair alongside Ms. McNeese. So I thank you both for your leadership, and we are looking forward to the work ahead. You may recall that during PACHA's September meeting in Charleston, West Virginia, we did have to say goodbye to 7 incredible council members whose terms had ended, but we were also fortunate enough to welcome 13 new members at that same meeting. I recognize that our new members have hit the ground running, and I applaud your enthusiasm. In addition, last month swore in 6 PACHA members who were appointed for another term. These individuals include Guillermo Chacon, Reina Copeland, Elisa Diggs, Vincent Guillermo Ramos, Laura Platero, and Dr. Daniel Weber. Thank you so much for your continued services. And shortly, we will add another member to our ranks, Jeff Taylor, whose oath of office I will administer. I understand that with these transitions, there have been several changes to the PACHA subcommittees. And I would like to take a moment to acknowledge and thank the following PACHA members for their leadership and co-chairing PACHA subcommittees. Ending the HIV epidemic, Tori Cooper and Guillermo Chacon. Stigma and Disparities, Rhea Copeland and Dr. Leo Moore. Global, Dr. Jen Cates and Dr. Patrick Sullivan. And PACHA's newest subcommittee, Aging with HIV, Long-Term and Lifetime Survivors, co-chaired by Alicia Diggs and Jesse Milan. Speaking of leadership, I want to thank PACHA for your swift and responsive June resolution calling for urgent action on the syphilis epidemic, lending your voices to others who have shared similar concerns, including state health officials. As you know, the populations disproportionately affected by syphilis and HIV have significant overlap. Data from CDC indicates that cases of syphilis have been increasing in the United States, especially among gay, bisexual, and other men who have sex with men. Further, the CDC reports that approximately half of men who have sex with men with primary and secondary syphilis also have HIV, and that MSM who are HIV negative and diagnosed with primary and secondary syphilis are more likely to later acquire HIV. The science encourages us to better coordinate our efforts in responding to both HIV and syphilis benefits everyone. Given our nation's accelerating syphilis crisis, HHS has established a national syphilis and congenital syphilis syndemic task force, which Admiral Levine leads. The task force mission is to leverage broad federal resources to reduce syphilis and congenital syphilis rates, promote health equity, and share resources with impacted communities. It utilizes a syndemic approach because of the complex nature of this public health challenge, in which social and economic environments can exacerbate negative health outcomes. The task force is composed of agency representation from across the federal government and is driven by the work of subcommittees as they work closely with non-federal partners across the nation. Their work focuses on 14 priority jurisdictions recently identified by the task force as having the highest burden of disease. I know Admiral Levine is eager to update PACHA on the progress made by the task force. In the meantime, thank you, Kay Hayes, Dr. Tim Harrison, Lieutenant Commander Nellie Gazarian, Stephen Talone, and our colleagues at OIDP for your outstanding efforts coordinating the task force. We have found ourselves so quickly in December. I would like to take a moment to recognize the work throughout the HIV community to observe World AIDS Day. Since 1988, the world unites on December 1st to commemorate this important day. It serves as an opportunity to commemorate those who have died due to AIDS-related illnesses, honor the more than 39 million individuals with HIV around the world, and speak with one voice about our commitment to ensuring equitable access to HIV-related services and solutions. Last Friday marked the 35th anniversary of World AIDS Day with the theme World AIDS Day 35, Remember and Commit, honoring those we have lost and recognizing that their courage and passion have been essential to the progress we have made thus far. And as you all know too well, this epidemic has been profound, impacting individuals, families, and communities across the globe. I would like to ask everyone to please join me in observing a moment of silence to honor those we have lost from AIDS-related illnesses. Thank you. I see that your agenda today will build on World AIDS Day and take a deeper dive to explore how we can successfully reduce new HIV transmissions in the United States by 90% by 2030, among other critical discussions. Important progress has been made towards this goal, particularly because of the investments supporting the innovation and expansion of HIV services in the 57 jurisdictions prioritized in the ending the HIV epidemic. As we continue our collective efforts, I want to encourage you to continue to utilize our OIDP team in regions 4, 6, and 9 as resource to advance EHE and the National HIV/AIDS Strategy. Tailoring HIV efforts to meet the needs of specific populations is a key to realizing that goal. So I'm pleased that you will be discussing HIV-related needs of trans men and non-binary individuals, as well as the needs of people aging with HIV, both long-term and lifetime survivors. I look forward to hearing more about the issues and ideas raised as you discuss these topics. So I know you have a packed schedule, but before I go, I have two important announcements. First, HHS is accepting applications for individuals to serve on PACHA from now until Friday, January 5th, 2024. Information on how to apply can be found on the About PACHA page on HIV.gov. Members and viewers, if you know anyone who would be a good candidate to lend their wisdom and expertise to the Council, please encourage them to submit an application. Second, it's my pleasure to welcome and swear in our newest member, Jeff Taylor, to serve on the President's Advisory Council on HIV/AIDS. For those of you who may not be aware of Jeff Taylor's many contributions to the HIV community, he is the Executive Director of HIV and Aging Research Project in Palm Springs, where he conducts community-based research on living with HIV. Living with HIV for 38 years, Mr. Taylor has served as a community advisor to many research groups while providing monthly HIV treatment education sessions for patients and providers. Mr. Taylor, will you please join me in saying the oath? Excellent. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Sorry. Yes, go ahead, please.
Great. All right. Well, please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I do solemnly swear
I do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same,
and I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same,
that I will take this obligation freely
that I will take this obligation freely
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion,
and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties
I will well and faithfully discharge the duties
of the office of which I'm about to enter.
of the office of which I am about to enter.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations and welcome.
Thank you.
You'll be a great asset to the council.
So thank you very much, Sarah. Before I invite PACHA's Executive Director, Kate Hayes, to conduct the roll call, it would be terrific if we could give Jeff Taylor the opportunity to say a few words about himself. Jeff, congratulations. It would be wonderful if you could please share a little bit about what you're going to bring to PACHA.
Sure. Well, as was mentioned, I do a lot of work at HIV and aging. I'm now a 40-year survivor. That was a slightly old bio that I provided, and owe my life to the research that has happened over the years and the advocacy that others have done over the course of the epidemic. Like all of us, we stand on the shoulders of giants in this. And another hat that I wear is working on cure research. So I'm very passionate about that and making sure that, we stay alive and healthy enough to benefit from the cure. So it's an honor to be here. I'm really delighted to see that there's so much focus on aging on the council now, and already some committees formed, and I look forward to working with you all to further that agenda. So thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Jeff, there are many comments in the chat, lots of members welcoming you. On behalf of the entire committee, we are very grateful and appreciative for your service and look forward to your contributions, particularly around aging and HIV and cure research. And so thank you very, very much. Okay, I think I'm going to turn this over to you to officially start our roll call.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you to the PACHA co-chairs, Marlene and Vincent. So I will start with the roll call. And if you would please, when I say your name for our listening and watching viewers, if you please tell your affiliation and if, where you're working, et cetera. So it gives a breadth of how we represent across the country here. So I will start the roll call. PACHA co-chair, Marlene McNeese.
Good morning again, Marlene McNeese, PACHA co-chair, also Deputy Assistant Director for the Houston Health Department, present.
Thank you. PACHA co-chair, Vincent Guillermo Ramos.
Present. I'm employed by Duke University School of Nursing, North Carolina.
Thank you. PACHA member, Guillermo Chacon.
Guillermo Chacon, Latino Commission on AIDS, New York, North Carolina, Texas, and Florida.
All right, thank you. PACHA member, Philip Chan.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Phil Chan, infectious disease and HIV physician here from Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island.
Thank you. PACHA member, Tori Cooper.
Good morning, everyone. I apologize for the feedback. Tori Cooper, Director of Community Engagement at the Human Rights Campaign, and then the HIV epidemic co-chair.
Thank you. PACHA member, Rania Copeland.
Good morning, everybody. Rania Copeland, founder and CEO of Equity and Impact Solutions, a strategic advising consulting firm based here in Los Angeles, and very proud to be a Stigma and Disparities co-chair.
Great, thank you. PACHA member, Mackenzie Copley.
Good morning, everyone. Mackenzie Copley. I'm the co-founder and CEO of 110 Health in Washington, D.C. Very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. PACHA member, Alicia Diggs.
Good morning, everyone. Alicia Diggs here in North Carolina. I'm the Community Engagement Manager for the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill Centers for AIDS Research, and also a new chair for our aging subcommittee. So thankful to be here today.
Thank you. PACHA member, Jennifer Cates.
Present. Good morning, everyone. Jen Cates from KFF, based here in Washington, D.C., and co-chair of the Global Subcommittee.
Thank you. PACHA member, Paul Kawada. PACHA member, Paul Kawada. PACHA member, Duvia Lozano.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today with everyone. Program Director for Chicanos por la Causa Latinos Unidos contra el SIDA program, Arizona.
Thank you. PACHA member, Tiamoy Luckett.
Hello, everyone. Tiami Luckett, Senior National Organizer at Transgender Law Center and Program Manager for Positively Trans. I'm in Little Rock, Arkansas, and I sit on the Stigma and Disparities Subcommittee.
Great, thank you. PACHA member, Jesse Milan.
Present. Jesse Milan, President and CEO at AIDS United, headquartered here in Washington, D.C. I'm a person living with HIV for now 41 years, and I am co-chair of the HIV and Aging Committee.
Great, thank you. PACHA member, DeAndre Moore. PACHA member, DeAndre Moore. PACHA member, Leo Moore.
Good morning, Dr. Leo Moore, present, Medical Director for Clinic Services at the Los Angeles County Department of Public Health, and also honored to be a co-chair for Stigma and Disparities Committee. Thank you.
Thank you. PACHA member, Laura Platero.
Present. Good morning, everyone. Laura Platero, Executive Director at the Northwest Portland Area Indian Health Board.
Thank you. PACHA member Kayla Quimbley.
Good morning, everyone. Kayla Quimbley, National Youth Ambassador for our Advocates for Youth, and I serve on Stigma and Disparity Subcommittee.
Thank you. PACHA member Natalie Sanchez.
Good morning. This is Natalie Sanchez, Director for UCLA Los Angeles Family AIDS Network.
Thank you. PACHA member Patrick Sullivan.
Good morning, Patrick Sullivan. I'm a professor of epidemiology at the Rollins School of Public Health, Emory University in Atlanta, and grateful to co-chair the global subcommittee with Dr. Cates.
Thank you. PACHA member Jeff Taylor.
Good morning, Jeff Taylor, pronounced he, him, director and founder of the HIV and HE Research Project in Palm Springs.
Thank you. PACHA member Marvell Terry II.
Good morning. I'm sorry. Principal innovator for the Ever4 Consulting and a community activist.
Thank you. PACHA member Hansel Toops. PACHA member Carol Tresden.
Morning, everyone. I'm present. I'm Carol Treston. I'm a nurse. I'm the executive director of the Association of Nurses in AIDS Care. And while we are a global organization, I am located in Philadelphia.
Thank you. PACHA member Dafina Ward.
Good morning, Present. I'm Dafina Ward, Executive Director of Southern AIDS Coalition, working across the region of the Southern United States, and I am based in South Carolina. Thank you.
Thank you. PACHA member Daryl Wheeler.
Present. I'm Daryl Wheeler, and I'm the president at the State University of New York in New Paltz, New York, and I serve on the Stigma and Disparities Committee.
Thank you. And also our CDC HRSA Advisory Committee on HIV, viral hepatitis, and STD prevention and treatment, better known as the CHAC liaison, Wendy Armstrong. Wendy Armstrong? All right, I will quickly go through some of our federal partners that are here on the platform. Director Harold Phillips.
Present.
Great. David Johnson.
Present.
Great. Adrian Shanker.
Present.
Thank you. Timothy Harrison.
Present.
John Akutumalade.
Present. Good morning, everyone.
Thank you. Rick Haverkate. Jonathan Merman. Robin Fanfare.
Present.
Thank you. Heather Hauk.
Present.
Thank you. Yemisi Odrosanya. Ernia Hughes. Kristen Roja.
Present.
Thank you, Kristen. Timothy Holtz.
Present.
Thank you. Jessica Lee.
Present.
Thank you. Michelle Schreibler.
Present.
Thank you. Maureen Goodnow.
Present.
Thank you. Rita Harcrow. William Dilday.
Present, but I'd also like to acknowledge my colleague, Tracy Carson, who's on the line.
Hi, Kate. Nice to be with you all today. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much. Glad to have both of you here. Sharonda Brown.
Good morning, present.
Thank you. Caroline Talev.
Good morning, present.
Michelle Sandoval Rosario.
Present.
And finally, Neelam, as we say, Nelly Gazarian.
Good morning, present.
Great. That concludes the federal partner roll call. You will see we have a whole host of our colleagues across the federal space here. With the meeting, I turn it back over to our co-chairs.
Thank you so much, Kay. And thanks for everyone for being here today. So I want to build on something that Sarah started. In preparation for today's meeting, we thought that we would spend some time really reflecting and having an opportunity for remembrance and gratitude. Last week, we paid tribute to World AIDS Day. And on this day of solidarity, we extend our heartfelt recognition to all individuals, communities, families that have been impacted by HIV, including the millions affected within the United States and across the globe. As it was the 35th commemoration of this pivotal day, the theme echoed powerfully: World AIDS Day 35, remember and commit. It is an opportunity to reflect on the lives that we've lost, the battles that we've fought, and the progress that we've made. So on the heels of World AIDS Day, as a collective community here at PACHA, it would be terrific if we could again pause and build on what Sarah started. And if we could just take a couple of moments to hold up a picture, a name of someone who we'd like to honor, to remember, and have a moment of silence so that we can really recognize the struggle, the sacrifices, and acknowledge all the progress that we have made despite the adversity that we have faced as a community. I'd like to invite everyone to please hold up a name or a picture in a moment of silence. So thanks to everyone. And in addition to reflecting on our loved ones who are gone too soon, the theme of World AIDS Day 2023 also propels us forward. It's an opportunity to really have a rallying cry for collaboration, for innovation, and for unwavering commitment. Together, we hold the power to shape a brighter, healthier tomorrow. And so as I turn it over to PACHA members, Dr. Patrick Sullivan and Dafina Ward, to facilitate today's first panel, let us remember with gratitude and commit with determination and stride boldly towards a better future.
Thank you for leading us in that time to remember and to draw our commitment to moving forward from the people that we've recognized, and so we stand at a time of real opportunity. We're going to spend the next hour or so talking about getting to zero, and I'm grateful to be able to open up this discussion with my friend and my colleague Dafina Ward, and I think we'll have a great conversation. We're looking forward to sharing some information. We're looking forward mostly to having some great discussions and about where we stand. So I just want to have a quick moment to start us off by saying that we have some ambitious goals towards ending the HIV epidemic. And I just want to give us a bit of a reality check that we're aspiring in our plan by 2025 to have reduced HIV incidence by 95%. Since our 2017 start in this effort, we've currently reduced incidence has come down about 13%. We aspire by 2025 to have 95% of those living with HIV know that they're living with HIV, and we're currently at about 87%. We aspire to have 95% of people who are diagnosed with HIV linked to care, and that's currently at 82%. 95% of people living with HIV to be virally suppressed, and that's currently 66%. And we're going to talk a bit more about this, but we have a goal of getting half of those who might benefit from PrEP onto PrEP by 2025, and we're currently at about 33%. So to start us off in this discussion of how we get to zero, I'm going to turn things over to Dafina Ward to get us started. Dafina, over to you.
Thank you so much, Patrick, and thank you to everyone for being here today. As we launch into this conversation and talking about how we get to the goal, this panel discussion is very intentionally framed to center community and conversations around not just the goals themselves, but what we are seeing happen in our communities, and what are the barriers and facilitators towards reaching those goals. So as we're on the coming off of World AIDS Day and the acknowledgement and commemoration of December 1st, holding true to the themes of World AIDS Day on its 35th commemoration. One, to remember and to commit. And then additionally, from a global perspective, to let communities lead. So first, before we launch into our panel discussion with some esteemed folks who are doing great work across the country from a community lens, would like to invite our partner in the fight, Mr. Harold Phillips, Director of the White House Office of National AIDS Policy, to share with us from his perspective and experience, where did we begin in the setting of these goals and what have we achieved? And to provide any insights that will help to frame this conversation today. Harold?
Thank you, Dafina, and thank you to PACHA for holding this panel. First, I want to say thank you so much for not only having me, but also for all of the work that many of you on PACHA and many of you in the community did with regard to World AIDS Day last Friday. World AIDS Day served as a nice moment for us to be with colleagues and to reflect on our achievements and the work ahead. And so I think this panel is very timely. In the last 5 years, we've achieved quite a bit with the Ending the HIV Epidemic Initiative in the United States, the National HIV/AIDS Strategy, and the ongoing accelerated work of our federal partners, our health departments, and also those of you in the community. Last week on World AIDS Day, the White House released a couple of documents that I want to make sure that everyone has seen. In addition to the President's proclamation for World AIDS Day, we also released a fact sheet that talks about the Biden-Harris administration accomplishments related to both our global and domestic efforts to address the HIV epidemic. We also released the National HIV/AIDS Strategy Interim Action Report, which details over 50 actions that the federal government has taken since the release of the strategy 2 years ago. And while it's not comprehensive in nature and doesn't clearly put out there everything that the federal agencies are doing, we picked some of those actions that we wanted to highlight that shows how we are beginning or continuing the work and the collaborations between agencies to increase the effort to address the goals of the strategy. So I hope that many of you take time to take a look at that action report and see it as an ongoing call to action, because in the spirit of this panel, and also sort of what our data tells us, we're not declaring victory at this point in time. We're saying that we are moving in the right direction, but the pace is not equal across all populations and across all communities. And so it was sort of this delicate balance between showing some of the action, but also letting it be sort of a clarion call that we also need to accelerate not only the actions on the federal level, but those on the state and local and community level, and that we need to continue our focus on some of our priority populations. The action plan itself talks about some of the things that we've done to reduce stigma and discrimination by ending the federal blood ban on men who have sex with men, updating the breast and chest feeding guidelines for persons who are HIV positive, the Public Health Service Corps, which changed its medical standards to begin accepting applicants with HIV. We also talk a lot about some of the work that's done within the Office of Civil Rights, and for example, in the U.S. Attorney's Office in the District of New Jersey, which secured its settlement to resolve the allegations that Comforts Hands Home Healthcare, a home healthcare provider, discriminated against people with HIV in violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. I don't know if you all saw also, which I have called one of the best World AIDS Day gifts ever. The Department of Justice released its ruling that the state of Tennessee and their implementation of their HIV criminalization laws violates the ADA, which this is huge for us. And this also gives us another avenue in ways that we can approach some of the state HIV criminalization laws as we look to repeal and reform those laws as our national HIV/AIDS strategy calls for. We talk also about the Administration for Community Living, which published the Older Americans Act Notice of Proposed Rulemaking in June of 2023, designating people with HIV as a population in greatest social need. And so this helps prioritize them as part of the Older Americans Act, which will include funding and services. And so they're looking at releasing that final rule in 2024. So that was also very exciting, and we wanted to highlight that. Our Office of HIV/AIDS Housing launched their webinar on HIV and aging in April of last year. So really sort of doubling down and paying attention and trying to really figure out how we make those system adjustments to better serve people aging with HIV. And then, of course, there was the work that NIH did on this as well. So I think many of our goals within EHE and in the National HIV/AIDS Strategy are aspirational. And we know that we have not received the funding necessary to meet all of the targets. But that isn't stopping us from going down that path and trying to reach those targets anyway. When we look at our national data, none of the jurisdictions met the 2025 goal for viral suppression. And we all know that overall in the United States, we have some of the lowest viral suppression rates in the Western world. But we did see some good numbers related to PrEP uptake. One jurisdiction met its EHE goal of knowledge of status, and we are making progress in PrEP uptake. CDC recently released data that shows that, but it also shows that a lot of that PrEP uptake is not happening among the populations who need it most, our Black and Latinx populations, and also African American women. So we still have work to do there. So while 10 EHE counties have met their PrEP goal, and we expect these numbers to increase, those counties are San Francisco, Washington, D.C., Miami-Dade County, Suffolk County, King County, New County and Queens County in New York, Philadelphia, Travis County, and King County, Washington. So as we look to continue that overall effort, we also need to pay attention to the priority populations in those areas. Nearly 90% of all Ryan White clients are virally suppressed. And disparities between populations and geographic areas within the Ryan White program are lessening. I think many of you know that Ryan White has continued its focus in that area, focusing on priority populations. And one of the things that they've done really well is be able to disaggregate that data to really look at populations and see individuals, populations, and communities that are being left behind and really focus and target efforts and services designed to close those disparity gaps. So as we have learned, not only in Ryan White, but also in our PEPFAR world, being able to disaggregate that data so that you better understand who's in care, who's not in care, who's in prevention services, who are we reaching and who are we not, and then specifically tailor interventions to close that gap really is a way to improve our overall outcomes. We know we have more to do in the epidemic in all of the areas and among all populations, and we have to continue our focus on re-engaging and sustaining individuals in care. And we must focus on those who have Medicaid and Medicare and ensure that they're getting high quality care and that care matches what we are seeing within the Ryan White program. So I hope that sort of helps shape some of what we're going to hear from the community about implementation.
Thank you so much, Harold. You said so much that we could dig into, but definitely want to lift up as we transition to hearing from our other panelists, the idea of like needing to make systemic adjustments, that a tailored response is very necessary. And also acknowledging that even with federal level goals, that there are local and state barriers that exist to implementation that we're working to address from a federal lens. So at this time, I'll turn it back over to Patrick to introduce our panelists, our remaining panelists.
Thanks, Stefina, and thanks, Harold. We're really excited today to have three excellent panelists to help us think in different dimensions and from different perspectives about our 2030 goals. And so what I'd like to do is introduce our panelists. I think they'll join us in our Zoom stage. And instead of doing introductions, what I'm going to do is welcome them and then ask each panelist for our opening question to start by briefly introducing yourself, including your name, your pronouns, your organization, and your location, and then jump into the questions. So our panelists today will be Oscar De La O, Vanita Ray, and Maurice Williams. Welcome to our panelists. And what I'd like to do is start out with just sort of a high-level question for each of you, which is, from where you sit, where do you think we are now in our path to our 2030 prevention and care goals? And we'll start with Oscar De La O. If you could do a brief introduction of yourself and then let us know where you think we are today.
Good morning, everyone. I am with Vienna Center Human Services in Los Angeles, and my pronouns are he, him, and his. I think that Harold put it very well, that in regards to the policy, at the discussion of it, we have all the right tools, solutions to address the issue of reducing HIV. Where we need to, in my opinion, and the experience at Vienna Stud, is that we need to examine closer the implementation of the plan and how is it resonating with the stakeholders that we're asking them to embrace. We have very good discussions at the local level, at the planning councils, and all of you have great discussions as well. But I believe that many times we're not bringing on board the stakeholders, the consumers, for them to be aware that there is this document, this plan, that is looking out for their well-being. We have mentioned many times the marginalized communities that we work with that have been stigmatized, traumatized, and knowing that there is this tool to enhance their well-being, I believe will help meet the goals. Also, we need to do a much better job in disseminating and informing the media, our elected officials about the plan, and take it out of the circle of HIV providers, planners, government, but really bringing it to a much larger agenda. Because stigma continues to be the number one issue that I see impacts my community, that hinders accessing prevention or treatment. And I saw in the LGBT community, as we worked to implement marriage equality, how the effort was around changing hearts and minds. And those type of campaigns are needed in the HIV. We saw it in the early years with our passion, our rallies, our reaching out for change, because it was people that we loved being impacted. And now, from my 38 years of working in the field, it seems that we have kind of normalized that what our communities need are services. And yes, but before we get people to services, we need to embrace them and make them whole and change their mind frame that they're worthwhile individuals that should have the ability to be mindful about their well-being. And I think that if we can incorporate what's already in place with a little bit more of community mobilization and embracing, we will be able to achieve the plan at a much faster rate.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Next, we'll turn to Benita Ray. If you could introduce yourself about your organization and location and pronouns, and then and give us your take on where we sit towards obtaining our 2030 goal.
Sure, Patrick, thank you. You and Daphina, I appreciate you all asking me to be here. Benita Ray, she, her, aya pronouns. I am with the U.S. People Living with HIV Caucus. I live in Houston, Texas, so I'm a creature of the South. I happen to be in DC right now for the PPC meeting. It's what we do in community, trying to get our perspectives heard by doing double duty, even without being paid, because this isn't, we live this every day. We can't go home and not be positive. I've been a woman living with HIV since 2003. And I've been here before, so nothing I'm gonna share today is new, but I have the real fortune to gain the perspectives of serving on the U.S. People Living with HIV Caucus as a Black woman living with HIV. I've been a part of the HIV Racial Justice Now, and everybody's heard by now the Declaration of Liberation that provides a framework for including the issues around racial justice into the strategy, which still aren't here. I've worked with a federal FQHC, and I've been working on ending the epidemic since 2016. And I have to say, I'm the one who wrote the plan for Houston. And I got in the middle of that plan using these traditional things. We need more PrEP, we need more testing, more education. And it dawned on me that that was not enough, that biomedical solutions are not enough. And where I sit, Black people and Black women and the South is the most impacted. Yet I rarely see strategies that are focused on the South. I rarely see strategies that include community-driven responses. We're down here doing the work, and I'm gonna highlight some of that a little bit later, but we don't get the federal partnership. Our folks who need the money is not getting it. The people closest to the problem, who are closest to the solution, are not the ones to do it. So on the ground here, we don't see much different. We can talk about the successes at Ryan White, but I live in a city of about 3 million. Our Ryan White serves less than 30,000 people, right? So it cannot be, that is not enough. We don't talk enough about Black and Brown communities. I'll say HRSA did a great thing when came up with a SPINS project, Black Women First. It's getting ready to end. Folks say it's successful, but the money is going away. We just had a United States conference on HIV and AIDS, Black love letter to Black women. We're still here. Where is the love? So I've heard federal officials say sometime that we may end it for some and not all. I need y'all to know that is unacceptable, because the not all, I have a feeling, is my community. And there can be no end if they're not here. Black AIDS Institute under Rania Copeland, we have other entities who have done plans around what it takes to really involve and impact Black communities. And yet I don't hear anyone saying it's not like you have to go find it. We're right here to be those partners. One of the things I learned in 2016 when we were doing the work for Houston is that we must include an intersectional and social and racial justice approach. Biomedical solutions without the cultural and social aspects will not work. So yes, we have the biomedical tools, but we are not willing to admit about the systemic and structural changes that are needed. And yes, HIV criminalization is one of them. The federal government can do more. Even in the newly released update last week, there's barely a little bit of mention about criminalization. Why are we talking reform? It's time for it to be over. We can't educate, PrEP, and test our way out of this without expanding the way we look at this. We're 40-some years later. This is just one more of the inequities that my community faces. And we at PPC yesterday, we had a HRSA representative who was asked the direct question about we know Black and Brown communities are impacted more. We see it in PrEP, we see it in everything. What are you doing? They said, well, we see the same thing, but there was no answer. because no one wants to talk about race, and I don't believe we can get there without this. Folks have declared that racism is a public health issue, and yet we don't acknowledge it. We don't acknowledge it in the work. Most of the language around this is shaming and blaming the Black communities doing this to itself. But HIV did not know I was Black. So why? My community is still vulnerable to HIV due to all these inequities and concentrated disparities, COVID, everything. We are tired. HIV cannot be solved without looking at these issues. And we stand ready to partner. We are not hard to follow. We've said this stuff over and over, and yet when we leave here, we don't get the kind of partnership we need. So I'm here again, willing and able. And I'll talk more about some of the things that the HIV community has done in demanding better, where we've outlined some things and some of the other communities have done around racial justice that we really we think would do more to add to the tools, the biomedical tools that won't get my community there. And so thank you for having me today.
Thank you. Thank you, Vanita. I hope we can come back, especially to talking about like why social and racial justice approaches have to be done. I mean, the goal of everybody, for example, is to increase, viral suppression or increase folks who would benefit from PrEP from getting it. But that is only going to happen if we look at the underlying reasons that we're not where we want to be. So thank you for putting those on the table, and we will come back to them. And I'd like to turn to our third panelist, Maurice Williams. And Maurice, if you could briefly introduce yourself and your organization, and then where do you think we stand today in thinking about these 2030 goals?
Well, thank you guys for having me again. I think they nailed it right on the head, just taking it all in. And I am a lifetime survivor. I'm 30 years old, born with HIV from Johns Hopkins University, a part of the Youth Experts and Advisors. And I'm pretty new to this, trying to get in with my grassroots organization through being an artist and activism. And I love what I'm hearing, and I agree with it all as far as the systemic things that are going on. It starts there, right? The stigma, the decriminalization is one thing, but to walk in a room and feel like you can feel comfortable about talking about your status is another one. I feel like a lot of the times when I get on these conversations, it's some of the most talking about it I do with my community members, because they won't. I grew up in a household where my mom passed away from complications with HIV just because she simply wouldn't accept it. And I made a vow and a commitment, now that we're talking about those commitments, to myself and to the cause, that I will be a part of the cure. So I do see where we are with prevention. I do see the strides we've made, but the HIV prevention is, like we said, not reaching those pockets that is needed the most, those hotbed areas, especially with African-American women, like I named, like my mom, who was unable to get access, who was unable to get the knowledge, and was unable to accept it because she didn't have that cultural impact that made her shift how it was for them coming up when they grew up with things like polio or other epidemics. And it just still hasn't happened yet. 35 years later, there still hasn't been that mental shift in the culture. And I know that a lot of it has to do with because of that unequal coverage, or even if they get the knowledge of, oh, now, my insurance won't pay for it. I've dealt with so much as far as with trying to change my insurance and just trying to work my off to be able to afford things that I should already have, with hearing that HIV or AIDS is one of those most vulnerable populations. And, I don't feel like it. I'm living with it for 30 years. I do get help when I go searching for a needle in a haystack. And I feel like it should be more palatable for the community. I feel like it should be almost shoved down our throats in a sense of, because the resources are out there. We have these meetings often. I come to them a lot of the times, and I do sometimes say a lot of the same things, but I feel like the recommitment is what we need to do, and not just to remember, but to recommit to the cause, and to also keep in our foremind the cure, and have those conversations still about cure, because I feel like that helps push the needle as well, and not just about, like she said, testing it away. And the statistics are crazy when you look at them, when you think about them, especially for Black gay or Black MSMs, and how the PrEP is not really prepping. Like when I say in my communities, we know this out there, but they're not really fear in it. If there's a level of invincibility that my community have, the youth that I grow up with, the young adults, that they don't really take it as serious. And it's sometimes because they don't have the hard facts, but I feel like a lot of the times too, that those people, those stakeholders really need to break the fourth wall with the community and be able to let them in and hear their voices. They are the experts. We on this call, we are the experts, and we need to be a part of the study, research, planning calls before the informed consent form even comes out. We should be a part of that research. We should be a part of in that room, on a seat at the table. I think that they think about the whole patient, and it's way more than after we leave this call. Like she said, we still have to go home and deal with it. We still have to adhere. We still have to deal with our families and disclosure. And no matter how long you've been in it, it feels like a knot in your stomach when you're trying to push this thing and trying to push the needle a little bit more further. So I'm grateful to have this conversation, but I do think we need to help. We need to be able to help more. We need to be given the chance to give our assistance.
Thank you all so much. And, I know we only have a little bit of time today, and I think y'all are three folks we could do this all day. So we're going to shift into some discussion. And, I really appreciate the fact that PrEP came up several times. One, that PrEP, recognizing CDC's preliminary report that came out that Harold mentioned earlier, that estimates, suggested that 94% of white folks who could benefit from PrEP have been prescribed it, while only 13% of Black people and 24% of folks in Hispanic and Latinx communities who could benefit have been prescribed. So shifting to holding that in mind, Vanita, I want to ask you a question. How do you think, with that just being an example of the disparities that we're talking about when we're talking about the necessity of an approach, of a commitment to addressing racial and social justice in an effort to reach our goal, how have you seen the community show up? How have you seen the community respond as we're thinking about putting those resources into the hands of folks who are closest to problem and solution? How have you seen that manifest in your work as we're talking about reaching these goals?
All right. Well, great question. It's interesting. I don't always talk about PrEP because I tend to focus in the systemic lane, but I want my whole community to come up. Our community is like a big house and got a bunch of different rooms, and we need, when one room come up, the whole house come up, but we still need to get better. So some of the ways, and these are the same disparities, we look at this stuff and we just kind of keep repeating it without telling the story of it. We know that the marketing was who it was geared for and everything. We know who had greater access. The ways I've seen community show up is, for example, in the caucus, even though we're people living with HIV, the more we get better, the more the stigma is reduced, the more our communities get better. We came out 2 years ago with Demanding Better, where we include issues of racial justice that we know need to be dealt with around, immigrants, sex workers. There is so much to talk about. We've done that. We've been working with Harold Phillips for several years now to do this. We were directly responsible with quality of life discussion that is coming out now because we have pushed that. The community has come up in ways that we have been fighting MHS, molecular HIV surveillance. We haven't been successful, but we have engaged with you all to do it, and we're still getting a roadblock because folks are still not taking us seriously around the things we say. We're still not seen as the experts in this. The other ways that the community has shown up, I just went blank. In Houston, since we started this work, for example, in 2016, and when we realized we needed this intersectional approach that included, social and racial justice solutions, we talked about it, but folks weren't familiar with talking about it. We're very uncomfortable, and that was in 2016. But it took this long. In the last 2 years, our health department has reached out and said, okay, let's dig into it. And so for the last 2 years, we've been talking about how to infuse social and racial justice into the HIV response. And because of that, we've developed our own quality of life pillar that addresses some of the issues around the quality of life for people living with HIV. Y'all's goals may be viral suppression, but that is not necessarily our goals. We got folks in our community that on medicine or not are trying to live their lives, and to be pill policed and shamed over it is not the solution. The HIV racial justice now, like I said, came out with a declaration of liberation with some examples and some key steps about how to get there. It's really unnerving to me that we can look at the data, and I'm sitting in the room and they want me to clap because the incidence for Black women has gone down 2%, but yet we still represent 60% of all women living with HIV. I'm not celebrating. And we finally get a SPINS project that's just ended in, after 3 years. I'm on that advisory committee to working with them, trying to push for that to be more. So I'm really proud of what the community has done with demanding better, and we continue to engage and push. We were just on a call with CDC. I'm inspired by the work of Thrive SS and others who are out there that are continuing the work, even without the partnerships that we have asked for, and even without the support we've asked for. We've worked with the funders concerned about AIDS and developed a document where they convened the first ever racial justice work group of funders. And so now there's a document around how to do racial justice principles in HIV philanthropy. I've said it a number of times. We'd love for funders to begin to look at that and begin to realize how to do a job at funding the folks who are closest to the problem. You cannot look at the data and not come away with the conclusion that HIV is a racial justice issue. We see it, we know it, but if we can't name it, we cannot fix it. So I think we've done a lot and we're continuing to do more. Southern AIDS Coalition, I need to give y'all a shout out. We have a Southern AIDS PPC here that we have organizations around the table doing what they can. We need a focus on the South. We need a focus in rural communities. We need to talk about Black women who still have the highest comorbidity of any group. They did a love letter to us, but we're still here. And I'll end there. And I hope that I answered your question, because I can go off on a tangent. But I need you all, when you talk about the data, tell the story behind the data. You further stigmatize us when you throw out data without the story of the historical and social context in which Black women have had to show up all this time. That intersection of race and gender, those inequities, no one is talking about it. We want to talk about social determinants of health so we can tie it up in a nice bow, but let's unpack that. Stigma is not the same. It includes homophobia, transphobia, racism, discrimination. We've got to talk about that and really get serious about funding the people closest to the problem to deal with it. I hope I got to your answer.
Oh, you got to it several times. Thank you, Vanita. It was great. Before you ask the next question, I wonder if Maurice or Oscar, if either of you have a specific example you want to share around like that infusion of a community approach that focuses on racial and social justice in our efforts.
I do. I totally agree with everything that Vanita mentions, and it crosses over to the community we serve. We find that the issue with PrEP is more around the trust issue, the medical side effects, and the qualifications, whether an individual is going to qualify to get the medication, especially if they are undocumented. Where we find that the issue lies is that PrEP is in a medical setting, and many times medical settings are not the trusted agents that a community needs, where they can come and get their answers and trust that what is being told to them. It's not just having them sign up for PrEP, but it's about walking them through the system. What we had to do at the end of start was eventually we got our medical license. So last year, we were able to start helping our community access PrEP. And when I share about the value that the community places on trusted providers, or where they feel comfortable, I'll give you an example of our experience with STIs. For many years, we have identified and informed our local health department about the high incidence of STIs within our community. Now that we got our license, we were able to start screening. Since last year, close to 47 to 50% of individuals that we screen have an STI, many times syphilis. Why did they come to us knowing that there are many other providers? It is that feeling good, that trust, that many times we're forgetting that it's so important to individuals, especially individuals that have been marginalized and experienced racial social inequalities. So the recommendation that I would have is let's ensure that there is more collaboration. If PrEP needs to be in medical settings, that there is that collaboration with trusted partners that can help with the initial navigation and not put all the process within a medical setting.
Thank you. Maurice, I'm going to keep a piece of this theme, but ask you a new question, which is, Vanita rightly points out that we can't describe disparities without telling the story of them and without acknowledging that they're really wrapped up in structural racism and racial injustice. I think one of the things that we want to think about is how do we use grassroots organizations, how do we use authentic voices, how do we use non-traditional providers towards multi-generational approaches, creativity, towards trying to really obtain our common goals, understanding that they're not really about that they really are much broader and deeper than just people getting and taking medications. They're about systems of care and systems of oppression and injustice that gave rise to this. So what are some creative approaches and non-traditional approaches that might help us move us in that direction?
Well, first I want to still echo what Oscar said. It does really start at trust, and like the reason why, you know, there was a mental shift for me had a lot to do with my physician, and it started there. And a lot of the resources just came out of that. And it wasn't to say I was special or anything, but I went for it, and it was a shift in my mindset. And then she was there, and she was willing, and she wasn't stingy with her resources. She wasn't stingy with her knowledge. She invited me to the meeting. She put me on the boards. She asked me to be a part of this study. I was actually in a study with her about the impact of physician in the patient and how that would affect adherence and viral suppression. And it was tremendous for me because I went through a point of adherence because it is a journey where I was really sick, and I was mentally, I just wasn't here. And my doctor could tell that before I could even speak with her. And she's one of those people who wrote me a recommendation to graduate school. So it's not a relationship where it's just, oh, I got to go to the doctor, which I've had, been a long-time survivor. But I finally found a physician who's in my life, who's been in my life for about 7 years now, that made the difference. And I think that it became a thing where now she's invited me to like meetings like this. And I was a part of the ATN, and I was a part of the NIH conference, and even a part of the impact conferences. And I think having those providers or those physicians reach out, lend a hand like that to their patients and not just see them as a number, it makes a total difference. My doctor, because she could tell me to do anything because she sees me. And when she sees me, it now becomes, you know, the shift is not in my hands, and now it's up to me to go to the meetings and act on it. But it's because of that bridge in what she was, and now I'm able to be a part of these support groups, which I never would have had, and people who are like-minded, and it's a networking opportunity as well. In addition to, when we think about things creatively, meet the people where they are. Honestly, a lot of the info I get about with the developments in HIV, sometimes it really is on the social media, down to the data apps, up and down on the YouTube and my advertisement, and it works because it's in my face. It's where I am, and I don't have to look for it, and it's on my level, and it's palatable, and it's going to make me think about it now because it's alarming and it's relevant. And I feel like you have to meet the people where they are. You have to give them a jingle. You have to give them something catchy. You have to really let them see their self, because representation matters. And I feel like we have to reflect society, put a mirror on society, and they're going to have no choice but to look at this. So.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Oscar, would like for you to speak to what role or how you're seeing organizations, because we've been talking a lot about the power of individuals, right, in our efforts. So thinking about community-based organizations, organizations committed to this work and in furtherance of the goal and just improving the quality of life for our communities, what's working and what do you see is missing?
Through the different networks that Bienesta participates in with sister organizations, there's always the common theme about the discussion around racial equality, not transferring to the outcomes of the funding awards or the allocations in our community. So while we hear that there is a discussion, an effort, a commitment to really changing the paradigm to ensure that communities that are serving the most marginalized members of our society impacted by HIV are receiving the resources, it's not always happening. And that puts organizations as always working in a deficit, having to do a lot in order to meet the clients' or the consumers' needs. At Bienesta, one of the things that we have shifted in the last 4 or 5 years is that there is no wrong door, that we don't approach our services from offering a menu and saying, this is what we can offer you, and that is it. But we work with the individual from a a complete wholeness and try to meet their needs. Most of the time, their issues are not around HIV, but there are other issues that are primary in their concerns before they can even address issues of health and wellness. I believe that there is also the opportunity for all of us that are providers to continue to engage with one another and have discussions around why do we have high rates among people of color communities that drop out of care. And the system calls for us, the trusted providers, to re-engage them back into care. But we're basically putting them back in environments where the client dropped out. And many times we focus on issues that is the clients. The client doesn't have a priority, the client doesn't have transportation, and many times that is true. But we are not having a conversation across our system about the need to enhance the cultural and the skills to embrace the community so that they feel comfortable, so that they feel at home. There are many excellent providers, but many times it's the structural barriers within different settings that don't allow for the ultimate health outcomes to occur.
Thank you for that. May I ask a follow-up that for you, Oscar, for anyone on the panel? How have you seen changes? You mentioned like some of these requirements, some barriers that may make it hard to get to the heart of the caring for the holistic needs of a person. Are there any specific examples you would give of things that worked in the past that are now more difficult to be able to implement because of restrictions or barriers that may come with funding or tied to resources that you would like to see come back because you know they work in your community?
Well, during my years of leading the organization, I always believed in collaborations. So always said, no, we don't need to be a medical provider. There are experts in that field. Let's collaborate with them. But we see that for certain members of our community, that hasn't worked. There used to be more support for coalition building and networks, and it was encouraged by our health departments. So the Gay Men of Color Consortium in LA for many years was funded by the county. But then it was determined that for accountability purposes, it was best to contract individually with the 8 members. That really dispersed our ability to talk with one voice, as it was mentioned at the beginning of today's meeting, that we could go as 8 strong organizations to our planning council and present the needs of a community that was across sections. And we need to get back to building those networks, but that it be welcome and supportive. I believe that also, there has been an effort to fund organizations, but many times there are those restrictions that even our local health department cannot easily move money around because they have their grant either from CDC or HRSA, and they're committed to spending the money in the way they described it. So there has to be more flexibility to address the issues from what we have always called it. It's an emergency. Emergencies call for things to be more fluid. And I'm not saying not to have the accountability issues in place, but to put the resources where they are needed to make a difference.
Thank you for that. Patrick, back to you.
Thank you. So I just want to ask one last question, but I feel like I want to ask it acknowledging just how much important has already been said. So before, maybe you'll see why I'm saying this when I get to the question. But I think you've all raised such important points, and so I want to ask this question in acknowledgement of some of the important things that you've already said. You've already said some things that are profound and impactful. Oscar, you just talking about the power of coming together with networks, the power of having services that are really tailored to not the number in the chart, the blood work, but to the needs. Maurice, you talked about how important it was to be seen, and to have a relationship with that provider that really launched you into a lot of other areas and making impact. Vanita, I want to acknowledge your holding us to account to say that we can't solve these problems if we don't address structural racism and racial injustice. But in light of those things, which you've already brought us so much, but I want to ask one last question, which is, if we just boil it down, what is one thing that you would prioritize to say that we have to do if we're going to achieve this goal? When we're making a list to share back with the PACHA, with our federal colleagues and our community colleagues, what are 3 things, one from each of you, we can put on the list that say that we're no way we're going to get there if we don't do this? And I will start with Maurice because you're unmuted.
No problem. I would just say that it was very important for me being a part of my Youth Experts and Advisors Committee. mostly because it was made up mostly of us, and we were all around the same age, around the same demographic, from the same area, and we had something in common, that we were positive. And with that, what came out of it, it was all different kind of networking opportunities and partnerships. But I would say that it's important, not just for me and my group, but for any in the jurisdictions, for it to be some type of support group, some type of grouping, or come together where it's by them, for them, and near them, and whatever that means to them.
Giving people places to come together, by them, for them, and near them. That's wonderful. Thank you, Maurice. I'm repeating these so I make sure we get them right in the notes. Oscar, what's your sort of one thing that we must do?
We need to keep in mind that we're working with communities that even prior to them being labeled as high-risk individuals or people living with HIV, they were already discriminated, marginalized, stigmatized because of their other identities. And now with HIV, that we need to focus more on the ability to address them as whole person, and one that includes the embracing, the love, because I see our community that it has worked for Bienestar for over 34 years, that when you treat them as part of the family, that you bring them in, that you show that you really care and love the community, that makes a big difference. So I would say models that address care, whether it's PrEP or HIV treatment, as whole person, individually, what are their specific needs, rather than from a menu of already determined services available for people with HIV.
So trying to see and serve whole people for all the aspects of who they are.
Correct.
Fair summary. All right, Vanita, you're going to bring us home here. What's the one thing that we must do to reach these goals?
So I'm not going to repeat what Oscar said. So I'm just going to say some formalized engagement by us from the community. The way that community is defined in a lot of the work you all do really is a buckshot approach. It doesn't specifically include the HIV community, the US people living with HIV caucus. We are here. So the definition of community the way it's loosely defined allows folks to skirt us instead of coming to us. So we want real community engagement. We want formalized engagement, not picking us off one at a time. We have a collective voice in the caucus and other places, whether Dandelions or wherever it is. Utilize that so folks can be accountable to us. You can be funding us to do the work, that since we're closest to the problem, we're closest to the solution. So formalized structural engagement with a redefinition of community that requires y'all to partner with us in ways, because we've done the work. Y'all ain't listening, and we're not funding it right. Folks ain't accountable to us. So that's what I would say. I can create a list, but I'm gonna just go to one.
So formalized structures of engagement that result in sort of deeper and more meaningful engagement, but also a recognition that there are a lot of folks who've been in this impacted by, who can do the work, and making those partnerships to do the work together, or to let other folks do it when they can do it better than government. So great. So I'm going to turn things back over to Dafina. I think we maybe have some questions and answers Q&A session from the meeting. So I'll turn it back over to you, Dafina.
Absolutely. Thank you again to our panelists. And there's already some great dialogue happening in the chat. Wanted to save time. We have some time here for questions from folks who are here on the Zoom with us. So definitely want to make space if there are questions that folks want to bring for our panel, or remarks based off what you, brief remarks based off what you've heard, but primarily want to have an opportunity for you all to ask questions. So I assume folks can come off mute or raise a hand and bring you in.
Yes, we'll ask folks to raise their hands so we can better acknowledge and get ordered, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Damon. Guillermo.
Yes, thank you, all the speakers, Maurice, Oscar, Benita. I truly believe that if we don't engage people living with HIV, as the three of you, I believe, mentioned, we will be missing the opportunity to, in a meaningful way. It cannot be just an invitation, but also has to be an investment. And we need to do better, I think, and as a challenge for all of us. The second piece is that we need to support the networks of led by Black folks, led by Hispanic Latinx, led by young people, led by people over 50 living with HIV. But on the prevention side, we need to realize that 97% of the funding go to research and care. Only 3% go to prevention. And then that's a structural challenge that we need to go and educate, a lot of members of Congress, even though it's difficult. I always told people we need to go and talk with the folks that don't understand that what we are trying to do is every time we avoid someone to get HIV, we save over $1 million to the healthcare system. Then we need to use the economic argument with some folks, and with others, I think we also need to go deeper on homophobia and transphobia. We are working together along with Bienestar and organization from Puerto Rico to California and throughout the US to gather, to bring together a leadership summit this coming May 5th, 6th, and 7th in DC to update our federal agenda. Also because we need to be proactive. We cannot just say we have a problem. We need to be very proactive and say here at the federal level, this is the recommendation for the communities most impacted. And then each of us, we need to go to our city, counties, and states and territories and build our own agendas. Statewide agendas are key because the states define how healthcare priorities and define how it's delivered to every individual. And we need to ensure that those that don't have voices, that we elevate, especially gay, bi, trans community that historically has been marginalized. Thank you.
Thank you, Guillermo. Now we'll have Paul, followed by Marvell and Carol.
Sorry. First, I wanted to just start by saying thank you to the panel. Oscar, you're a legend. I am so glad to see you. It has been way, way, way too long. And it just made my heart sing. And Vanetta, same thing to you. You are both legends. You have been here forever. And as an old person, I appreciate it. And I love seeing all of you, and I love your suggestions. And I want to say, particularly to Maurice, you're the future, baby. You are the future. And, it is so important to soak all of this up because unfortunately, it's probably not going to be done in the next couple of years. And we're going to need you there. We're going to need your leadership. We're going to need your vision. And so thank you all for being here and for doing what you do. One of the roles of PACHA is to make recommendations to the secretary. And that we're here to make a series of recommendations. And what I'm asking you is if you could sit down with Secretary Becerra right now and say whatever you need to say to him, what would you say to him? That's the first thing. And the second thing is, what I'd like you to also ask and look at is, right now, we live in a time in America where race has divided us and divided this nation like never before. And we are particularly living with a Congress that has done some unspeakable things and have weaponized us in ways. And so how do we encourage the secretary to stand up to all of the racism and the homophobia and the sexism and the transphobia and the immigrant phobia that we are seeing in America right now? Thank you.
And Paul, anyone jump in response to that?
Earlier, I spoke about developing a campaign to change hearts and minds about the general community's perception of HIV. And we have examples from the early years. I recently heard the secretary speak, and it was very scientific, data focused, because that's what's presented to him, and he'll speak on that and the plan. But there wasn't that call for action, the call to embrace, the call to remove the stigma that we see plays a major role in our community. But that's because we are not prioritizing it. We go to the science, we go to the research, which is extremely valuable data, but there has to be that balance between the two.
Thank you, Oscar. Anyone else? Thank you for your, oh, Vanita, go ahead.
Well, no, I would ask Secretary Becerra some of the same stuff I've said here. You know, you need to do better. We need you to do better engagement. We need you to be very specific around communities that need to be included specifically and not jumbled up. We need you to acknowledge that HIV is a racial justice issue, because until we do, we want to treat all communities the same, and they are not. And without that, I am, a person, before I live with HIV, you cannot address HIV at the clinic door. You got to be developed upstream. You got to deal with this upstream. And so we need to talk more about that. And we've got folks out here ready to work with you and have been doing it, and got some ways for you to do it better. What are you doing with the HOPE Act? It's something that's right there that can reduce discrimination and give folks access to medical care. We're just waiting for Secretary Becerra to give folks the word. So there are things we can bring to their attention that others don't seem to be doing. So thank you, Paul, for the question.
Yes, thanks, Paul. Marvell.
Yes, thank you so much for this panel, and thank you, Maurice, Oscar, and Vanita, for your time and your energy you gave us today. My question is to you, Vanita, and you mentioned the Declaration of Liberation document that you and I share space with so many others in New York at the Ford Foundation to create. This document was created about 2017, 2018. Why do you think organizations have not implemented this document in our grant making and our program implementation and so forth?
Yeah, good to see you, Marvell. Yes, we did. So, and I'll speak on my experiences here in Houston and what I think is the issue, because the declaration has been used by a lot of organizations across the country, the PPC and others, in which we're proud of. But I think ultimately what it does is it challenges the existing power structure. It challenges, when we go down into, even in the South, and organizations that are serving Black folks, is typically not run by us. When you look up the power structure, the decision makers are not us. And it challenges, so I would say, white fragility, fear, loss of power. Folks, instead of just the realization that it might take you move into a different seat, and that who needs to lead, folks have declined to work on it because it means you're bad, or you don't, you're racist. No, you're not. I think the fact is, if we continue to ignore what is obvious, then I have problems with you. But I think ultimately it requires a real shift in the way that we do business, a real shift in the way that organizations work. It requires a shift in the way that we fund. And I think that we're so entrenched in doing things the way we've been doing it, and not wanting to, this country is famous for not wanting to acknowledge the racism. It didn't just happen in the last couple of years. It's been there all along. We've been seeing it all along. I think there is a real general reluctance. I had an experience with an organization going there and run by white men, and I was pushing for racial justice, and I lasted 3 months. So I think there is a real reluctance and fear of loss of power, which we see on the national stage. And it may not be as drastic as what we see on the national stage, but it exists. And I think it is what continues to perpetuate, and folks want to keep doing what they've been doing rather than take that other seat, let someone else lead. If it's about Black and brown people, where are we in the decision-making structure? And that's just still not happening because of, I think, this system that folks don't want to change.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Thank you for that question, Marvell. So our last question is going to come from Carol.
Thank you to the panelists. I have notes of things that you said that really resonated with me. I'm going to make a few statements, and then I'd like you to react to those. It's not really a question, if I may. As you probably gather, I represent a good portion of the healthcare workforce when I talk about the nursing workforce, and that includes nurse practitioners. And for those of you who may or may not be familiar with ANAC, one of our I think key accomplishments is how we really think about bringing people into the healthcare workforce who aren't the typical face of the healthcare workforce. So if you've been to our conference, you see that we have transgender women who are our plenary speakers. We have our board president is a African-American PhD out of the School of Nursing. So, I mean, we really live that work. However, we're small, right? And how do we expand that where we really bring into and develop that pipeline for members who are from the communities, whatever community that may be? Is that the Black and brown community? Is it the LGBTQ? Is it the transgender community? So that they are members of the healthcare workforce and then become leaders of the healthcare workforce, right? And so, you know, when you talked, Oscar, about you bringing people back into a system, but the system isn't working for them for many reasons, but one reason that we put forward is because the providers don't relate to the individuals. So how do we, you know, that's part of our goal at ANAC and working with other organizations like the National Black Nurses Association. How do we build the healthcare workforce to be members of that, so that they come from the community, right? So it's not only expanding healthcare, but it's also expanding the economics of the community, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I was thinking when Paul was talking about, you know, we make recommendations to the secretary that, you know, this is a great area for us to make some recommendations about how do we build, diversify, and have meaningful engagement of community members in the healthcare workforce, not just the volunteer peer educator who sits in the clinic, which is important, but I mean, how do we have the nurse manager, you know, of the clinic, right, or of the even the CEO of the hospital? So I'm just curious what your thoughts are there, and is that something that you think is one part of the solution? I know there's many other systematic upstream, as you talked about, you know, many other parts of the solution, but what are your thoughts there on PACHA, for example, getting involved in making these kind of recommendations? You know, how do we make that change?
And if you have a response, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I do think it's very necessary. Going back to it being by, for, from us, all those things. I think even what you were speaking about pouring back into the community economically, with possibly, you know, asking for funding for things like programs for these women or men, if they want to be nurses, to get their certifications or to go through schooling if they don't get the access. And so there is a streamline of keeping your talent or keeping your people in-house. And you know then that they're for the cause and they're willing to push the pen. They're not just there for a check. I do think it's important to have a network of like-minded people going towards the same goal so that we're swimming the same direction. And then nurses are on the front line. I think they're some of the soldiers in all wars. So I think it's very beneficial as well. They're part of that physician's team, you know, they're part of that experience we get every time we go to the doctors, whether we want to interact with them or not. And sometimes it's a long lasting impression. So for them to be a part of the solution as well, or to also be rallying and to having their own initiatives or agendas, I think it's another leg or another boost to add to the fight.
I totally agree with Maurice, and I would add that there be streams to incentivize the providers to stay and work in our communities. We all understand they've gone through a lot of work, gotten into debt, and of course, they're looking to help people. And if they find jobs that pay more than at a community-based organization that is just starting their medical clinic, still is not an FQFC to have the reimbursements to offer competitive. But if there were programs that if they worked in that field with community-based organizations, they would get access to, I think it would help a lot to increase the number of providers, as Maurice described, that type of providers in our communities.
Yeah, I agree. I think we've got to elevate people living with HIV and others from the community beyond the peer navigators, the prevention specialists. We need them in decision-making where their opinions are heard, you know, keeping us on the front line where we don't have the ability to affect policy and impact. Don't ask us to come out sharing our story and bear that emotional labor for a gift card, you know, which is demeaning. But we also need to deal with some of that bias that folks bring in. I think if we brought these folks who with lived experience from the community, we might deal with that, because access in healthcare is one of the greatest stressors for us. And the system isn't easy to navigate. I also think we need to uplift the vision of our workforce. Right now, they're just trying to fulfill a grant. They're just trying to do something to keep you off their back. If we all had a vision towards what it means to end the epidemic or provide quality of life care for people living with HIV, we'd be working at a much higher level versus this just day-to-day put out the fires and we feel it, even though no one says it. And we're just trying to fill a grant versus serve the whole person. So I think our healthcare workforce needs a new vision, because we need to change the language that's stigmatizing. We don't fall out of care. We stop going, or we don't define it the way you define it. People who got diabetes don't be accused of falling out of care. We are not being adherent or compliant. That's criminal justice terms. Stop using them on us. You know, we're adults. We can choose to take a pill or not. But, you know, so you really got to we're grown ass adults, but when we walk into the healthcare system, we get treated like grown ass children. And so I want to uplift the vision, and I think hiring more of us and bringing more folks with lived experience into the fold would be great. And economic justice is a huge issue. And we've got the National Working Positive Coalition that's working on those issues. Why aren't we partnering with them? They are working on this employment and underemployment of people living with HIV and vulnerable to it. So Carol, thank you for the question, and I agree with you, but I want to just uplift this idea that it is a huge stressor when we go in there, and we need a common vision beyond the grant.
Thank you all so much. Thank you to my co-facilitator, Patrick. Thank you especially to our panelists, Harold, Vanita, Maurice, and Oscar. You all brought so much food for thought that I feel will resonate with folks throughout the meeting today and beyond. So thank you for that, for reminding us that getting to the goal requires us to not just have folks meaningfully involved, but to provide meaningful opportunities, community-led, holistic, upstream, formalized, and funded. Thank you so much, and back to our co-chairs.
And thank you, Patrick and Dafina. As you all have heard, our panelists really need no facilitation, but I appreciate the work that was put in to bring them all together to get us started today. Powerful, powerful reminders quite frankly. And for me, just a sobering conversation about, our present report card on where we are toward getting toward the goal and the necessary actions that have to occur. And so I really appreciated, Oscar, your reminders around changing hearts and minds of people and really sticking firmly to that tenet of these formed relationships that really matter. I think, Maurice, you spoke to it as well when you talked about the prep ain't prepping. It ain't about the biomedical. And I really appreciated the realities around stigma and racism. And so, just to also reflect in our conversations and lifting that up in Houston in particular, the resistance showed up in many ways. Vanita mentioned just a little bit of that, but I think it also lifts up as people describing those issues as being too big. What do we do about racism? What do we do about stigma? And it's really practical in what you lifted up, Vanita. I think Marvell put some documents in the chat. The idea that there are practical, implementable solutions that we can all take right where we stand and sit today. The idea that, stigma is certainly the continued enemy, but there are things that we can do right in our own local circles to make an impact. So just thank you, thank you, thank you. We will be obviously taking that very seriously into what PACHA will do in terms of the feedback that we've received from this panel today. And again, apologies to the members and to everyone joining us online. We are going to transition to a very quick lunch break. So use it as you will, but we're hoping to try to stay as close to time today since we are, really gearing up for our PACHA to the People session later in the agenda, and we really want to give all of its due time in that space. So if everyone could come back and return promptly at 1:15, we will go right into our next conversation and panel. So I will appreciate you all, sign off, and see you back shortly, 1:15. Thank you.
Produced by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.